Thank you everyone for adjusting to moving the meeting today. I know it gave an opportunity for some additional projects to be entered and for people to be able to kind of review what they had submitted. And so we'll go over all of those in just a minute. Dave spent yesterday and this morning kind of getting everything compiled and mapped and all of that, and we can see what's missing or what we want to add maybe from our kind of projects on our major thoroughfare plan. But first, let's just talk about the finalization of the prioritization weights. I'm going to go ahead and share the glossary. And thank you to those who did participate in kind of our poll and discussion on changing, or adjusting and looking at the order and how everything's weighted. And what I ended up doing was kind of looking at how, kind of everyone had wanted things to be kind of ranked in order, and then compared that to the number of various points that were offered for each category. And then there were some additional adjustments kind of depending on what those numbers ended up being. So my proposal at this point in time is that we would have 140 possible points. A couple of projects did end up getting some additional points, others stayed the same. And so I'll just go through those changes real quick. So high volume corridors, now it's 8 points possible, but going ahead and removing the 2 points for 0 to 10,000, because at that point you're really not a high volume corridor, and we should probably just go ahead and put points where there is some ranking there. So or over 40,000 would get 8, and then it just steps down by 2 points. Safety stayed at 40. There were a handful that suggested fewer points, but the majority of respondents did say to stay at 40 for that one. So that kind of keeps it easy. And like Dave had mentioned, the majority of projects don't actually end up with that maximum. Bicycle and pedestrian safety also stayed at 20 based on the responses. But again, we don't expect many projects to actually get that, and it does have a pretty quick step down. Removal of an at-grade railroad crossing got bumped up to 4 points. So it's just a simple yes or no. Multimodal got bumped up to 6 points. Previously, I think you just got a point for being a project, and then you got an additional point for connecting additional modes. I did adjust this so that if it's not intermodal, there's no points. And then it's 3 points times the number of modes instead of 2 points. So, or 1 point per mode to achieve kind of where it was suggested that fit within the weighting. The environmental justice stayed at 8 points. There was an additional comment, and I'm going to switch screens here real quick. There was an additional comment about how those hex bins would end up, or the environmental justice would end up kind of affecting the various communities and projects. And Dave has put together those maps for minority and poverty. So let me share those. Sometimes you just have too many windows open. Okay, so here is the minority map. So anything purple would get points, and anything yellow is below kind of that split. So we took what's the average for the MPO area, and if it's above that average, it basically is purple, and if it's below, it is yellow. And if there's nothing there, there just wasn't data, whether it's no housing or it's all employment or something like that. But because it's hex bins and we're narrowing it down in a much smaller area, there will be those gaps. So as you can see, it really does kind of provide some additional chances for projects to get points. Whereas before, you know, we would have a really large area, some of these outer tracks, especially in Springfield, the census tracks are a little smaller, but some of these other areas, you know, we'd have something that would cover a very large space. So that's minority. And then poverty is a little different, but we still see, you know, some places even just out, you know, kind of in the middle of the county, there's some pockets. And so I think that'll give us a much more meaningful way to connect, you know, these poverty, minority, environmental justice conditions to our projects. Before I move on, are there any questions about either environmental justice or any of the other categories so far? Okay, let me reshare the prioritization glossary. Okay, so then congestion management current is 15 points possible. So 15, 12, and 9 is kind of the stratification there. And then congestion management future is about half that value. And so it really just gets 7 points if it's above that 0.86. Let's see, freight corridor, statewide freight plan, this stayed the same, I believe. So 2 points for tier 1, 1 point for tier 2. Percentage of freight traffic is at 4 points, so it just goes 4, 3, 2 on that one. Bridge condition is now worth 6 points. So if it's structurally deficient, it gets 6 points. If it's not, it doesn't. Extending the life cycle gets 4 points, and local priority was bumped up to 15 points for those 2 projects selected by each community. So that gives us a total of 140 points. Now that we have the project submitted, Dave's been able to map them. He's going to be able to start applying these scores, and we can have a final discussion if something just seems completely off the wall. But what I do want to remind everyone, this isn't as specific as when we do our STIP prioritization. We're really looking for that collection of projects that can fit on our constrained list, as opposed to, you know, just 3 or 4 projects. So, you know, I think having some of these, you know, larger numbers and broader categories, we should still be able to see some ranking. But it's not necessarily going to be about, you know, did this one make it to the top 3? It's about the top 20 perhaps, or 30, or wherever that number ends up falling, depending on the cost of the project. So are there any questions or suggestions or changes anyone wants to make to these numbers?
Hey, Natasha, it's Frank.
Yeah.
Just as a heads up, I'm looking at our draft state freight plan, and they're redoing the freight network, and there will be some tier 3s in Springfield.
Okay.
And I don't know, the network's not finalized, but like Glenstone, parts of Sunshine are tier 3, and then James River Freeway, Kansas, and part of 65 are tier 2, parts of 65 and 44 are tier 1. So it may still work with how you have it lined out. Maybe we don't want to, because it overlaps so much with the major routes anyway, maybe you really want to highlight tiers 1 and 2. I just wanted to let you know that there's going to be a tier 3, and it's a lot more significant, I think, in Springfield now.
Okay. Do you know when they plan? I know they're doing some stakeholder meetings here soon, but do you know when they plan to finalize that?
I'm reading an email right now to look at this. I don't have that handy.
Okay.
I think they want to present it at these forums.
Okay.
Kind of have like a draft to show. So
my thoughts, but I'm welcome to whatever the committee wants to do without those being finalized. Drafts, you know, that it may not change, probably won't, but it always could. And we'll probably want to go ahead and get ahead on the scoring before that's final. And maybe that's something with the next step prioritization that can be, when we look at getting more specific on what projects to move forward. Maybe that's something we consider at that point in time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anyone else have thoughts on that? Okay, but thanks for bringing that up, Frank. It's good to know that, yeah, we've got those other freight routes through this area for sure.
I'd just like to add that, I have mapped about 80% of the projects, and there are going to be a few monkey wrenches as far as scoring some items. So I think we'll have to come back and kind of work through that with some alignments, future alignments that aren't there yet. It may be difficult to score some of those, and then some that won't have, AADT and other types of data and everything. But those would be, lower scoring anyway. So I just want everybody to be prepared for that, myself especially, because, it never really works out how you want it to starting out. So we'll just have to work through everything. And if we can get a map of the freight tiers and everything, if that pops up, we can, kind of work with that too. So it's a fluid process.
Yeah, and we'll point out those projects that maybe had data missing that affected their score. And that's why we always like to have a conversation and never rely on the scoring, 100% to end up on that final list. And, we can kind of come up with a collective decision on what ends up happening after we see how everything scores out. But thanks for pointing that out, Dave. Any other comments on the ratings or the weightings and the rankings? Okay, so I guess the next thing is to talk about the project list that everyone submitted. So let me share that. Dave combined everything into an Excel spreadsheet. I have sorted it by kind of project location and then by roadway alignment so we can kind of see which ones are next to each other. And we'll let you know if we need additional detail on some projects. I think there were some that we didn't have construction years for, so we'll be following up on that because that is kind of key to how our constrained list works. But just briefly, there are some area-wide projects, and these will be, difficult to score, but there are also things that in our last plan, and we'll try to carry that forward this plan, we created some programmatic categories. And so we have signal replacement, ADA maintenance, bridge asset management, safety improvement program, interstate and major routes, pavement improvement, minor routes, pavement improvement. And what we may end up doing, just depending kind of how we categorize things, we may end up combining some of the asset management together, this operational improvement program, and then ITS operations and management, which I believe we all are probably committed to moving forward on these kinds of projects. So we'll work that out as we determine how much funding we have left for construction of specific projects. So in Battlefield, I believe MoDOT submitted this, but the Route FF intersection improvements at Republic Road. There are a fair number that are just more in Greene County. We have Division Street improvements, the East-West Arterial, which is broken into 3 segments, Weaver Road widening, Farm Road 115, there's some I-44 projects, continuing the Kansas extension, the National Avenue extension, and then Plainview Road widening, and between Plainview and Weaver and Kansas and the East-West Arterial and everything, we're going to start to see that network really develop with these projects in there, some intersection improvements, more specific on the ITS, Route 60 improvements. And so it's kind of what's there for Greene County. And then in Nixa, there's a handful of projects, a CC in Maine, North Street, Route 14 from Nixa to Ozark, 160 capacity improvements, and then CC extension in Nixa and CC intersection improvements at Maine. And so I think that's a repeat, and we'll address some of those as we, go through the process as well. Ozark has a number of projects. We have the Farmers Branch expansion, Fremont Road expansion and phases, Highway 14 up here, and then there's several Highway 14 and CC projects down here. Highway NN, there's some additional intersection projects through here. Highway J widening, the Longview and 65 interchange, more and improvements, and Route 65 and CC operational improvements, and then the Sylmore widening. So then in Republic, we see 60 in Main Street with Highway P, MM, 174 improvements at Main Street, some 60 improvements, more for MM, the ZZ extension. And so then in Springfield, we see a lot of the major streets through town. And then there's I-44 capacity improvements, James River capacity improvements, Kansas Expressway, and this goes, looks like between Bennett and James River. And Don, you have that in 3 phases. Do you know, we'll probably follow up with you to see, maybe how you want to break that down a little bit.
Hey, Natasha, I
further.
think I submitted that.
Oh,
and
did
that
you?
came from, yeah, it came from the
Okay.
unfunded needs list because we talked about doing improvements from Bennett to James River Freeway, and we divided the funds up into 3 unfunded needs tiers, but we haven't really decided how we want to phase it, if it's like by limits or if it's by you do a little bit of improvements everywhere and then gradually get it to where we want it.
Okay, well, we might look at that and decide on some limits, at least for the purpose of the plan. And then that way we can do the scoring accordingly. But we can kind of work with everyone on that. And then some safety improvements, some intersections with National, more operational improvements, 65 interchange at Kearney. And then for Stratford, we see I-44 ramp improvements and Route 125 intersection outer road improvements. And Chris, I don't believe we got any submissions from Stratford directly. So if there's anything you guys have that you want to add to that list, and I'm sure you do between some of the Washington improvements and different things, we'd love to be able to include those. And then for Willard, Hughes Road, some sidewalk, and then Miller Road. So those are all the projects we received from everybody. I know there were some questions about, well, if someone else submits this, do I need to submit it? And it looks like everyone went ahead and just submitted the projects that they were thinking of. But if you realize something's missing from this list, we will share it out now that it's all compiled. Let us know and we'll make sure we get that on there. But then staff will also be looking back and make sure that we're not missing something that was proposed before. And then I think this will be a really good exercise to help us with, we're looking at that next tier of unfunded needs for the STIP prioritization as well. So.
Hey, Natasha.
Yeah.
This is Dawn. I just realized that I didn't add any trail projects that are probably a priority for Springfield.
Okay.
Should we have, and I'm not seeing any from any other communities, should we have added those?
At this point, probably don't worry about it. Well, with the, the trail bike ped plan that Andy's moving forward through on the TPC and the board, that kind of has a strategy for how to address trails. And so
Okay.
should the board adopt that, which will be taken to them this next month, what we'll probably do is include that as another programmatic section at the top and say, we're,
Okay.
going to commit so much to doing trails. So, yeah, I think maybe we just try to work it out that way. And again, none of our criteria would probably really help them score. So I don't think they're going to be on a freight 1 or 2 tier, huh?
That's true.
Okay, so are there any other questions or, anything anyone ran into when they were trying to get projects entered? Okay, well, quiet group, but I think, so for our next meeting, we should have some rankings. We have, some projections on our funding, so should be able to start actually breaking things into constrained and unconstrained lists. We will send out this project list and, just let us know if there is anything that you're like, oh, I can't believe I completely missed that, or, I thought someone else was going to submit that instead. Just, let us know and we'll try to capture all of that. If you give me just a second, I'm actually going to try to capture everybody that's on the call.
Did you,
before.
or are you able to send out that full list for us to review?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Yeah, Dave was just able to finish getting that compiled. So, is there anything else between any of those things or any other questions about the planning process that anyone has? All right, well, thank you, everyone. Go ahead and let you have your mornings back, but we will send out that list and we'll just kind of go from there. So thank you.
Thanks, Natasha, for getting us together.
Yeah, thanks, Mary.
Take care.